Okay, in this live stream, we're just going to be talking about the fact of how using protectionism and these policies of nativism and how they end up basically hurting everyone, and how looking basically backwards, how this basically only hurts everyone, and how it never ends up working for any type of role. And you can never rely on anything that any of these politicians say to basically go back, or whatever they're going to say for bring back jobs, or any of this other garbage they're going to say, because this does you cannot bring back jobs that were lost due to the actual progression of the economy. As the economy ends up evolving, as the world economy evolves, these things never actually come back. That's why it doesn't matter if they're using it by force or anything with that. The best that they can do is make these things temporary, and the government's going to be subsidizing it at best. And eventually, these things are going to go back to what they were before, and they're going to end up going away. Because the fact is as the economy starts to evolve, it's going to be going away for the reason with it. Now, there's reasons why jobs might migrate from one area to another, and it's because of certain points we might have in our economy here. Now, what we have with it is basically our actual economy here is the actual production is way too slow, and our cost to produce each item is way too high. This is why when we look at here, why products are actually migrating over to areas that are producing products at a faster rate, that are actually producing at lower salaries. It's not that these companies are trying to hose American workers. It's just American workers don't produce things fast enough, and they're not producing anything at a low enough salary. Because and this whole idea of people here need to have a living wage and all these other things like this. Well, the fact is they're not the ones responsible for any of this. If you want anything to blame, this goes back to the monetary system, where we keep raising asset prices from our actual government. These are the same people who you keep asking to raise the actual minimum wage, and this is from the same people who are these the same people who support these nativist policies, and the same people support the protectionist policies. They're all the same people. They're the ones who have basically supported all of these policies of pretty much raising asset prices year by year by year, and this is what ends up causing it. And they'll pander to you to basically raise that minimum wage when they know the minimum wage is only going to make things worse. They know that, and they'll tell you, "Oh, we'll raise that minimum wage," with it knowing full well that that's going to make everything worse, and it's a good campaign promise. With it knowing full well it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's only going to make things far worse. As we've seen several minimum wage raises over since basically the mid 90s. We used to not have as many minimum wage raises before, and we were actually seeing that people were actually being far ahead actually before. Ever since they've been doing more minimum wage hikes, people are actually going farther back, and if that actually coincides with the actual pretty much at the same time, the actual federal the actual rate of interest has been basically zeroed out at that same exact time, which is why when you start to see it, they've been continually raising asset prices, and that's been basically nothing but inflation. When you have inflation, you're going to go backwards, and that's what's going to occur. And and eventually, as technology progresses, you're not going to have the jobs that you used to. And what ends up happening is when you keep pushing more and more protectionism and asset prices go up because of these policies, basically blocking the rest of the world from actually coming in and competing is not going to actually solve any problems, especially when uh, when when all of our entrepreneurs are basically coming from outside in other countries and being able to come in here and actually do something to actually solve our problems. We're not getting new entrepreneurs actually coming out in within our country. This is not happening right now because we're basically just supplying nothing but people entering the labor market. No one's actually Virtually no one's actually coming in and actually creating something new in this country. That's not what's happening. So what we've created a whole problem of people that are actually going out there and they're actually creating more and more problems for our actual system. So when you've locked us off from the world, as we've seen that President Trump was doing, you were seeing that Trump was actually making things far worse. And you've had other people like Bernie Sanders try to bring up the same promises of trying to basically do that. And we see the whole Republican Party now pander to these protectionist and nativist policies. And it's only gotten worse on that side with it. And we're not bringing in any new entrepreneurs into this country. And it's making us fall further and further and further behind. And when you start continually add on more and more debts, you're basically all you're doing is you're inflating asset prices year in year and year out, and you're trying to basically state that this is growth. What's going to happen is this is not growth. People are not actually getting wealthy. They're actually just basically offsetting the inflation. And for those that are actually going into markets, and that's all they're doing, they're basically neutralizing the inflation that's actually happening. Those who aren't in the markets are actually getting crushed by inflation. And what ends up happening is those in between are actually just going to be people who are going to be uh, uh, just the victims of that inflationary policy that's been going on for a long time. That's why when you start to create policy that's continually doing this, you're not going to basically make anything worse by sectioning yourself off from the world, because you're not going to be eliminated from the effects of the market that actually goes on around in the world. You cannot eliminate yourself from this. That means when you actually do this, all you're going to be doing is making your problems far worse and accelerate any damage that is actually happening. We saw this with the whole thing with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union always wanted to section itself off from the whole world, and it felt that basically that if it could do this, it could basically always eliminate itself from whatever inflationary problems it would ever receive, and didn't have to worry about whatever problems it would have from its monetary policy. And this is what it would do with all of its nativist and its protectionist policies that it had going on. And what ended up happening was that everything going around it was eventually going to crush it. And it only worked as for them with it. They only held on as long as people believed in it. And the fact is that that doesn't really work as well with it, because people are kept getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. And eventually with it, when the walls start to break down, is people start basically saying, we don't want this anymore. And then once they start to break apart, then they were left with basically just Russia and that's when Russia ended up, when all the finances started coming apart on Russia, they ended up having a massive financial collapse. And that's what ended up occurring during around the time of the mid to mid late 90s. From that was actually a direct correlation from all those years of those protectionist policies. And they were just basically exploding big time from all of these things. And you can't stop any of this from happening, because the fact is, what's going to happen is, and that was everything that happened, where their currency plummeted to almost nothing because of the actual actions of that protectionism. And it'll happen here from all these things of raising asset price and everything. And you're not going to save any jobs. People think we can save these jobs. We can save these coal jobs. We can save these. We need to get all these coal power plants. We can get these. We can get shale oil with it. And people don't understand what's actually going on out there. First of all, when it comes down to oil, we actually have a world abundance of oil currently. Right now, with it, we still actually have issues with oil barrel storage. This is the biggest problem we have right now. There's too much oil out there. We're not using enough of it. This means that basically we have no need to drill right now with it. Frankly, with it, the only reason why petroleum is actually going up is because of inflation. It's not because we're not drilling or any of this stuff like that, where we can drill more with it. That's not going to have any impact on it. It's because of inflation. Now, why are commodities not going up with it? Because of like gold and stuff with it? That's because people are still putting money into the stock market, thinking that we have a healthy economy, because we're starting to somewhat come out of the coronavirus. They have not they're not actually believing that this is not a factor of the coronavirus, but actually a factor of the actual inflation. Once they realize that it's actually from inflation, you're going to see a big change. And once that happens, people are going to realize that it's that's causing oil to actually go up. It's not because we have no pumping with it, and there's actually a scarcity of oil. There's not a scarcity of oil whatsoever. That's why oil's not jumping in huge amounts in price. It's only kind of trickling up. Week by week, it's only gone to trickling up. But there was actually a scarcity with it, especially with the inflationary events of it. And with people going back to work, you would see oil jump well over $200 a barrel. And yes, I said $200 a barrel with that, because the fact is, you would see something insane like that, because of the fact is that there was an actual scarcity of it. Being that there's not with it, we're only sitting around $80 a barrel, because there's nothing there, because it's so plentiful. And what's going to happen is, basically, because it's so plentiful, that it's not being able to move. It's moving at such a slow rate. They're not being able to drop it down. They're not going to continue. They can't continually pump, because if they continually pump at high rates, what's going to happen is that we're going to have nowhere to store the stuff. They're going to have to basically create new storage facilities, and that's going to that'll cost them a lot of money. They're not going to do that for something that's not selling, and that would essentially cause a plummet in an asset that's basically could essentially become worthless if they store that much. So when people say, "Oh, we need to pump more oil," no, you don't with it, because there's too much of it. So when people are saying in that area with it, so we don't have the actual oil does not have the actual value in which we can create jobs from it. We don't have coal is not is not beneficial because it's because they're for mining or anything like that with, because the fact is it's not very efficient. And when it comes down to it, is we're going to eventually have to go to nuclear power. And nuclear power is going. We're going to have to get both sides of the aisle with it to realize that it's the only way to go for electricity. This is not. We do not have a thing. This is not Homer Simpson at the helm. And the fact is the reason why you have the right wing doesn't want to go toward it, because the fact is it's going to basically, it's not going to have your lowbrow people that are going to get jobs. You're going to actually have to have people who are highly educated there only. The left wing doesn't want to do it because they always had this over fear of the environment, when that doesn't exist with it, because the actual waste is either A, recycled, or B, used for nuclear medicine. And they always fear in these failed units with it that are always examples of government failures into nuclear power, and not actually examples of the private market actually using it successfully. We have examples of them using successfully, such as in France, such as in Germany. They've used that for decades without any problems. When they've actually shut it down in France and Germany, they've actually exhibited higher carbon footprints in those areas. Now, going back to the actual thing of jobs, we don't want to actually pander to these actual people who are actually complaining about change. You don't want to pander to people who complain about change of saying, "Oh, we don't need immigrants coming in. Oh, I'm scared about losing my job." Don't complain. Don't pander to any of these people with it. This is when you pander to these people, that's called populism. Don't pander to any of them. Just look to the Constitution with it. When it comes down to immigration, frankly, the actual Constitution is very, very clear. The federal government does not have the authority over immigration. It only has the authority over naturalization. There is a current naturalization law on the books that says once they've been here for 3 years, they can apply to be a citizen. End of story. If you want to change that, you can change that, but you're going to have to go. You're going to have to go through and actually pass a new law on naturalization and set a new amount of years. That's it. You're not going to be able to eliminate naturalization with it, because it's unconstitutional, and you're going to have to change a constitutional amendment. When it comes down to birthright citizenship with it, guess what? You're not going to be able to change that, because that would essentially affect any people that would have at least one member of your family that was actually there would be an actual citizen having what it calls giving birth within the country with it. So you'd actually have to start changing those factors with it, and and being that we had to have for equal protections within the country with it, you can't exclude certain people based on certain situations. So guess what? That's not going to change, and it's not going to go through the courts like that. So birthright citizenship is going to stay. You can't start adjusting that with it. So basically, and even without that, with it is once people are here, once people are born, guess what? They're going to stay, because the fact is as I said, immigration is not an actual authority, and that and any law needs to go with it, because the fact is that they are not constitutional. Don't, as I said, do not pander to. It is only hurting the actual country. When we start to view actual policy with it, it's actually causing more debt to the actual country by pandering to these people. When it comes down to these politicians, but they're actually adding more debt to the country. When we start to look at the immigration law with it, the actual immigration law actually adds massive amounts of debt to the country. For those people that are saying, "Oh, I'm a conservative," yeah, if you're really conservative, you would actually be concerned about the debt. if you're concerned about the debt, you'd actually be concerned about eliminating all immigration law as it stands, because not only is it not constitutional, on one point with it, it actually adds a massive amount of debt. And because number one, you're basically it costs money to, number one, enforce. Number two, you're actually removing people who would actually be paying into the tax system. So when you start to view it with it, is on the low end with it, you're talking about I believe it ends up going into about 500 million on the low with it per year, and about 1 billion on the high. And if we look at what it calls the amounts that Trump would have added, if he would have basically left it alone with it, and this is basically saying if he would not added anything with it, he could have theoretically, if he would just not added any new immigration law and left all existing immigration law, he would have actually, including all the excessive spending he did, he would essentially reduce the debt to basically, I believe, 75% of what it was. This is with all of his excessive spending, where he actually spent the same amount that Obama had spent. And he had added the same amount of debt that Obama had spent, and he had done that in a matter of 4 years, when it took Obama 8 years to do that. Now, he would actually reduce the debt from about 20 trillion down to about 15 trillion. And he would have still done that if he had actually done, all he had done was not add one immigration law. Now, if he would have actually cut all existing immigration law, it would be likely that he could have actually eliminated the whole amount of debt itself. Why? Because the fact is, immigration law is actually the most expensive impact on our actual system. The reason why is because when we look at it, just taking Hispanic and Asian immigrants alone, they cover 60% of all new entrepreneurs. This shows you how impactful they are onto the actual economy. Those are the ones that are actually driving our economy. So when we actually go against them, we're actually harming our actual economy. And when we harm our economy, we're actually holding ourselves back from the world economy, and it affects new job creation. This is why when you start pandering to these people that go, well, I don't like these new people coming in and they're going to steal my job and blah 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 blah. Well, every job taken is a job created. Frankly, we need to view it like that. And if you don't have the skills, if you're being basically replaced by a person that's coming over in nothing but sandals and tattered shorts and nothing else with it, if your job's being taken by that, you are one pathetic person, because it means you have no skills. If your job's being able to be taken by that little bit of nothing, and frankly, with it, I've seen other concerns of, they're going to bring their types of food here. Well, it doesn't. It means that's just the free market. If they're going to be adding the new types of stuff to our shores with it, that's exactly what we've always had. This is what's always had to the things. You're scared we're actually going to have more international cities come to the United States with it? That's exactly what you want. That means we're going to have more people visiting the United States, which means more revenue, which means your city gets built up, which means basically after that, your city gets far more revenue. Your city gets built as your city gets built up, and you had to pay less money in taxes. That less money in taxes means that it's going to be less money out of your pocket. That's a very conservative idea, and all these nativist arguments do not hold water. Anything basically that goes against it, basically you're going to have more jobs created. You're going to have when they come over, you're going to have more jobs created, because they create plenty. They're the ones who are creating the jobs. You're going to have far more tourism because you're going to create more and more international cities. You're going to basically have far more production of goods. That's going to basically turn us into far more of a manufacturing entity in the United States, and that's going to basically eliminate all of our need to rely on other countries. And we're going to basically and what's going to end up happening is you're going to lure in basically a system where we're going to basically have it to where the best succeed and the worst fail. And if that's what you're concerned with, well, the fact is we currently already have that system built in, as basically if you are a failure at your company, you can already be fired. And the fact is with it is if you're not concerned with it already with it, then frankly, I mean, we have a bunch of communist countries around the globe and communist and socialist countries around the globe. We have several of them that are more than willing to move to. It doesn't matter if you're a nationalist or a socialist with it. You can move to one of those countries. And frankly, with it, they had those things where you can't be fired. But the fact is you don't gain anything. And basically, is you're conscripted to military service as well. So you don't get any of the actual benefits of the actual United States at all. And you don't get the ideas of free speech whatsoever. You can't say whatever you want with it. But if you want the actual benefits of our actual country, you're going to actually have to realize it comes with the free market. The idea of pandering to you with it needs to end. And we're not going to continually pander to people that don't know what they're talking about and are trying to hold our country back. And when it doesn't matter if we're talking about individual rights, because frankly with it, you're not going to be able to hold these things back with it, because the fact is we've seen people in the past with it, and it doesn't matter what you do with it, things in society progress with it regardless of what you want. They do with it. You can fight it all day and all night with it, and it basically they progress in society, and it's not going to change. And it doesn't matter what you want with it. You can fight it all. You can continually fight against against what the Constitution says on immigration, and you're not going to stop it. Eventually we will work our way back to what the founders stated. And it's because it's actually what's going to have to happen for the United States to remain viable on the national stage. And eventually we're going to develop into we're going to have far more and more cities that are going to become international cities. We need this to actually continually be viable. We can't have our little white bread cities around the country and basically have our little safe spaces anymore. The safe spaces are gone. Sorry, but it's done. You can't have your little safe spaces of your little what it calls racially seclusive areas, because you don't want to actually interact with anything that doesn't look like you. Sorry, but that doesn't exist anymore. This isn't what it calls. This isn't the 1920s anymore. And this and what needs to be understood is that if the country is going to survive, it's going to have to basically be. We're going to have to be an international country that actually interacts with other countries around the globe. And when it comes down to everything with it, we can't just basically start with this idea of threatening other countries with it. We need to have these ideas of where everything is done through trade, and boils down to individuals, not nation states. And eventually, the ideas of nation states don't really matter anymore. And eventually, this is what's going to happen to where nation states just don't really have any power anymore. Doesn't matter what way this happens. And that this is what's going to eventually happen. Because especially with the power of the internet, it's taken a lot of power away from the nation state, and these nation states don't like it, and you find a lot of these people who worship the nation, who worship the bullying power of the nation state, don't like it. And the fact is this is eventually what's going to happen. And eventually what's going to happen is you're going to move away from this. And I know and it doesn't matter if it sounds scary with it, this is the future. You can't go back. We're not going back to some fantasy world of what you thought the time in the past was with it that never existed, that you saw in some TV show that took place in the 1950s, the 1960s with it, that never existed. But frankly, this is not the reality, and you need to get actually involve yourself around reality with it and realize that basically everybody needs to exist, and everybody needs to exist under the free market system, and basically everybody needs to be able to move wherever they need to, and basically everybody needs to be able to establish their own business and opportunity wherever they need to. The idea of protectionism doesn't work. It just basically kicks the can of the whole huge problem down the road, and it makes things far worse. We have more than enough historical evidence, and we have basically more than enough economic evidence that this doesn't work. We know we know all the problems of this not working on protectionism. We know when it comes down to protectionism that basically that it's never been the actual goal of society. You look historically on the actual goal of society has always been the free movement of people. That's why we've actually had the idea of sending long ships to actually do trade routes. We wouldn't be doing this if this wasn't the actual goal of everything for free movement of people. They wouldn't have actually done this. Although they would have locked everything down if the actual goal was actual protectionism and nativist policies. They would never have allowed never have allowed trade and the ideas of trade and immigration or any of this stuff with it. They would never have allowed that at all with it. But we've actually seen that this is actually historically how ideas and have passed, and actually how wealth has been created in history. And this is actually how the actual Christian religion was actually made, from the free passage of people. Now, unless you want to actually fight against that, and which is doing the exact opposite, then you basically want to, which would be kind of odd, because the same people that are fighting for the nativist thing are most of them claim to be Christian. You would actually want to actually push for these open borders policies, because essentially they would actually be beneficial, because essentially these would be letting actually majority Christians into the country. Specifically, the actual country that we actually border with is actually a Christian country. And yet they want to keep these Christians out. In fact, they would have called the actual every country below us is actually every country south of us is actually a Christian country. And yet, even the Caribbean ones, they're all Christian countries. And yet they want to keep these people want to keep everyone out. And yet they complain about everything about them with it, in every disgusting racist term you can actually possibly think of. and yet these nativists call themselves Christians. What the actual real thing would be actually allowing for open borders with it, which would allow more Christians into this country. Because they proclaim they're going to take their jobs, they're going to they're going to vote for the opposition party. Sure, they're going to vote for the opposition party, because the fact is you've said every racist term in the books about them. When you insult people with it, they're not going to support you. That's the way things go. If you want people to support you, you need to actually be open to them and actually be hospitable to them. If you want people to actually go toward your side, you need to actually act in a way that's actually reasonable, not try to be hostile toward them. If you act in a hostile manner, they're basically going to tell you to go to hell. And that's the way things go. They're not going to actually be a person that's going to be very, very open to your ideas. If you say you hate immigrants and then say, oh, well, how come you're not voting for me? Well, you told them you hate them, so they're not going to vote for you. This is plain and simple. It's common knowledge. And this is why when we talk about these nativist policies with it, is they're they're number one, unconstitutional, and so pandering to it is not going to help with it. And they really go out of these people that have actually gone back to these political science ideas that are go way back to the progressive era political science, and it basically specifically for these ones that go back to like the right wing on the political science. It's basically they feel that if they win enough people that are white, that they can actually win elections. This is frankly not true. We found out that this is frankly not true, because they feel that in demographics that everybody tends to want to stay in their own lane. They feel that this is the idea that minorities will vote for non-nativist policies, whereas all whites will vote for nativist policies. This is frankly not true, because the fact is they found that that whites are actually very, very split amongst these. And when we start to see this, we start to see that policy does not win. That policy is actually that policy is a pretty big losing policy. And that makes it so you would have to grab some type of minority if you're going to run like that, to get those types of things. And that's a very, very tough order to do, because you're going to have to convince them in some other way to vote for you. And that's not going to be very easy. And that's why when we start to view these things with it is on policy with it, is nativist policies don't work, because you're trying to convince them, oh, but it'll help you two out as well with it if we keep these other ones out. Well, the fact is those other ones in many cases are their own family. They're not going to turn their back on their own family. Their family mean far more than actual politics. Family comes before politics on these actual people. So you're not going to win many of these individuals. And so unless you're, that's why when we start to see this, we start to see some real shady types of tactics being run. As you saw the GOP trying to run in Florida and Texas, trying to claim Biden was a communist. Now, I'm not a big supporter of Biden. I feel that Biden, there's a lot of Biden's policies that I don't agree with, being being how Biden's handled certain things with it, uh, on the economic end with it, I think he on the social end he can do far better. But he is definitely not a communist or a socialist. He's basically a progressive leaning centrist. That's it. And they were trying to run on this whole idea with it, which is complete nonsense. And the only one that was actually on the ticket that was actually in the authoritarian realm was actually Trump. So the fact is we saw that, and basically since and when we see that basically these the fact is with it is that's what the whole point of it is. These nativists are basically want to basically think that the government can basically bail them out of everything, and they don't want change of anything with it. And we see that basically is any time where any type of thing where any change from their own little mindset is possibly happening, where they might have even a new restaurant come in town that's not basically one of these white bread restaurants, they start freaking out. And they're not willing to actually have any types of change of any types of way, in any way with it, way, shape, or form. And this is what's actually going on in their society. And they're not willing to adapt in any such way. And this is what's happening for them. And it's become this huge, big victimhood culture. And this is why we should even bother to pander to them with it. They're not, because everything becomes surrounded around this partisan ideology. And it doesn't matter if they're a socialist, or if they're a nationalist with it, or a communist. It's all the same thing. This whole idea of basically everything outside their ideology is they'll try to basically plan as being evil with it. And basically anything that actually is this that they view as change with it is something that they view as an actual threat to their lifestyle. And they're willing to attack with it. If they see anything different with it, they're willing to lash out with violence. And the fact is, they're the ones with it. If there's a new restaurant in town with it, there's a different type of food, they're totally unwilling to try it with it. If there's basically if there's a neighbor that doesn't look like them, they're not only not willing to be hospitable to them with it, they're going to be hostile to them and want them to actually move, because the fact is they don't look like them. This is the actual actions of these people. They want basically everyone to look like them, the food to be extremely bland, and basically them to basically be in their own little world of basically of a world that never existed, of a world that's basically based on the idea of the movie Birth of a Nation, and it was actually produced by the KKK, and that's basically their idea of their actual national view, their actual world view of the way everything is and the way everything should be. And this is the way these nationalists feel. And when it comes down to the socialists and communists, they still want this idea of where they won't accept anything other than this protectionist view with it, which is a shared view with these nationalists. And they had this. This is a shared view between both of them, and they feel that basically, if we can only use a lot of protectionism and raise the minimum wage and all this other garbage, that everything will be fine. Not realizing that there's an actual world economy, and that you basically anything you do here domestically impacts everything abroad. And whenever you do something in your own country, it actually has an actual impact abroad. If you basically start doing more business regulations domestically, that means anything overseas with it is going to make it more advantageous for businesses to do business elsewhere, because they're going to see you as being hostile to business within your own country, because you've now made it harder to do business, because you've now put a regulation. That regulation is basically a penalty on doing business. It doesn't benefit anyone except basically other countries. That's all it does, and it basically creates that equilibrium. The equilibrium is basically saying, since you're hostile to business, we're moving our business elsewhere, being Europe, being Africa, being the Middle East, being Asia, being Oceania, something of that sort. And they'll move that business elsewhere. And the reason why is because you've now demonstrated that you don't want business. Or actually North America or other areas of North America, South America, or the Caribbean. They're going to move it elsewhere because you've now demonstrated that you don't want business. You've made it harder. You've made one more area to jump, one more hoop to jump through, and they'll pick another country to basically move to. And it doesn't matter what type of thing, what type of penalty they say. Oh, if you want to come back with it, it's going to be such and such a penalty for you to come back to our country. Well, the fact is, if they find another country that's far more advantageous, they're never going to come back. All you're doing is just scaring away companies, and that's why protectionism never works. So they're just going to wait. They won't come back until you basically say, our country's done with protectionism. And that's the only way they're going to come back. And that's something that's going to happen in the actual economy of the United States. And that's why when we start to view this, we start to view we need to start viewing the economy of the United States in such a way that we need to be more open to being competitive. This means eliminating these barriers. Only have the minimal barriers that we actually need. Basically, make sure that if there's something that there's something necessary that needs to be done, desperately needs to be done, do it. If not, then eliminate it. If there's no need for something to be done, eliminate it. Such as when we're viewing something like the minimum wage, there's no need for a minimum wage. People are more than capable of negotiating a wage. This is basically all this is a barrier to work. People are more than capable of negotiating an actual wage to work. If the wage for the job is too low, people are not going to sign up for that, and companies are going to raise the actual price for that job. When you create a minimum wage, this means for certain jobs, they cannot create a wage. And that means that job has to be eliminated, and they might need to create maybe add that task, or maybe add several tasks to one other job that maybe didn't need that job. Maybe to an entry employee with it, maybe they have to add several jobs to it that maybe they didn't normally need to. Maybe for a cashier, they have to do that and some janitorial work that normally they wouldn't need to if they would actually eliminate that minimum wage, and they could actually have that be low enough that basically where they only had to do the cashier work, and they could actually pay someone else to do the janitorial work, another person to maybe do some like the gopher work, another person to basically maybe only manage, like, let's say, the fryer stuff with it. People that do specifically just the drive-through and stuff like, and such, so on and so forth, such as just using a fast food place, and they could basically do this, and maybe they would have the option of basically adding on some type of general table waiting to these places if they had the ability to reduce down those wages. And eventually you would work your way up in wages when they know you're reliable. Because the fact is, there is a liability on these jobs. And that's the whole thing with it, is people don't understand that when they hire you, that's a liability. And when they hire you, they're not just hiring you for you just sit there. They're hiring you for that work. Because when they hire you with it, there is a liability on you. Not only are you going to work out as an employee, is they only make money when they're actually producing products. When they're not producing products, they're paying you for basically doing nothing. And they need to basically ensure you are going to do something that's going to be helping them basically make sales. And that's basically what the actual sole purpose is. And this is something that needs to be understood, is when we start to see this, why pandering to these people is pointless. And people are going to say, oh, but if we get rid of this, then people aren't going to have a living wage. As I've gone back, the point of the actual thing is to pay you for the work that you're doing. It has nothing to do with a living wage. The idea of being able to function on these wages goes back to the idea of monetary policy. Your argument is not with your employer. Your argument is with the government and the central banking. They are the problem. By basically trying to up the actual asset prices, they're the issue. That's not what your issue is. Not with the people that work actually that actually pay your salary. Trying to squeeze every little dollar out of them with it is not going to solve it, and that are far higher than your actual value that you're actually worth. Next to people trying to say that, oh, we need so when they're doing that, because if you do that, and while fast food can be made here with it, there's plenty of other jobs specifically in customer service. That's why all of our customer service is overseas, because we've basically made it to where we have no value here at home. And that's why the idea of pandering to these people, and we've kept doing it, and we don't have basically any customer service jobs here at home, except for the people that are there on the lines to basically irritate you, so we can put someone competent on the line and basically calm you down and get you on something that'll get you on to a program that'll actually work for you. And then that's why we have those things there. Look at tech support. Tech support, always someone overseas with it, because we don't have anybody competent here, because people are basically asking for far more than they're actually worth. And this is what ends up happening when we start to find people that are actually trying to price themselves out of the market because of these situations. Because of the actual world marketplace, we don't have to actually the actual economy doesn't have to tolerate going domestically. They're not forced to do it anymore. They can actually go abroad because of the internet. And we can actually, companies have more than enough leverage to be able to do that. And this allows you to get someone who is competent and not deal with someone who's domestic and incompetent and a beneficiary of protectionism. Because you don't have to deal, when you get many of these jobs, you don't have to deal with someone who is basically working within borders, such as a lot of tech jobs. Anything that's a tech job, you don't have to deal with someone who is working within the borders. You can go with someone who's working overseas, and they're going to be far more efficient at their job and do the job right. We would rather have someone who does the job right than someone who's basically a beneficiary of protectionism that's basically an incompetent moron. And that's why when we start to see these things, we're going to basically see that we're going to be going far away from this. And if we as a country actually want to be efficient, we're going to basically see this is why we don't want to be pandering to these people. You want basically to bring these people into the country. You want actually competition. Competition is what makes your country great. You want competition. You don't want basically hatred of every other individual with it. You want basic competition. You want basically options within your country. The more options you have, the better. Freedom of choice is a great thing. You eliminate freedom of choice, that's a bad thing with it. I mean, we once had what are called arguments on the actual Senate floor about freedom of choice on products with it. Now now we have from the GOP. Now we have the GOP arguing, basically they're pandering to people who want to limit their actual freedom of choice when it comes down to their own neighborhoods. They don't want freedom of choice. They're going against it. And this is basically this is what nationalism gets you. Nationalism doesn't want freedom of choice. Same thing with socialism. Same thing with communism. They don't want freedom of choice. They want the choice. They want it chosen for them, and they want it very, very limited. And they want one brand, and they want basically to be very, very white bread for everything. Now I'm going to end it right here with it because we're almost near an hour. And bye, everyone.